An Irrational Hatred of Luton, a West Ham fan's story by Robert Banks. Forward by Tony Cottee. Chapter 53. Touch Too Much. West Ham United 4, Wolverhampton Wanderers 0, 5th of May 1990. David Kelly was sold to Leicester City and nobody cried. Perhaps the only concern was that we'd given him so much stick during his 18 months at the club that he might return to haunt us. Meanwhile, Frank McAvenny was set to make his return against Port Vale after breaking his leg in the opening game of the season at Stoke. Let me rephrase that, after he had his leg broken by Chris Kamara on the opening day of the season at Stoke. Port Vale should have been a pushover. Julian Dix missed a penalty in the first half, but we didn't worry about that too much once Trevor Morley put us 1-0 up. Somehow Vale managed an equaliser, but Tony Gale scored a rare-headed goal to put us back in front. It should have been curtains when we won another penalty. Dix didn't fancy it, so handed the responsibility to Quinn, who also missed. When Vale equalised again, even the emergence of Frank McAvenny couldn't raise us the extra notch required. A 2-2 draw against Vale was 2 points dropped, not 1 gained, and was unforgivable, particularly when there were 2 chances to put the game well out of Vale's reach, but they were both blasted into the crowd. The West Ham fans deserved better than that. It got better. The next 2 games were both away from home and both yielded maximum points. At West Brom, Ian Bishop scored his first goal for West Ham, Quinn and Keane getting the others in a 3-1 win. And at Oxford, goals from Quinn and Morley completed the double over Oxford. It was Grand National Day and I managed to lose a tenner. It was good to have West Ham as backup. We'd closed the gap on 6th place to just 4 points, lying in 8th, with Wolves 1 point ahead of us. Oldham and Ipswich had games in hand on us and could have overhauled us, but failed to do so. It was a straight fight between the top 8. 2 would lose out. Tim came to the game against Bournemouth with me. Bishop scored again in a 4-1 win over his former club, managed by former Hammer Harry Redknapp. He obviously wanted West Ham to win promotion, as his team laid down and died at Upton Park. The bloke behind us on the North Bank had a fiver each on 4-2 and 5-1. He was urging anyone to score, he didn't care who, but he lost his money. Life's a bitch. We drew away at Barnsley, 1-1 with a Trevor Morley goal, then beat Ipswich at Upton Park 2-0. Kevin Keane making his 100th league appearance and scoring one of the goals. It was all going well when we had to make the traumatic journey back to Boundary Park. It was the sort of scenario that football commentators loved. I could just see the headlines the next day and the copy underneath being something like, West Ham returned to the scene of their St Valentine's Day massacre and extracted sweet revenge with a battling display to earn 3 points for their promotion campaign. Nothing of the sort happened. We were tanked 3-0. I was beginning to think it might be time for Karen and I to go our separate ways. Although I loved her very much, I couldn't foresee a time when I might live happily ever after with her. We had to find a new flat, so I decided to get the move out of the way and give it one more chance. These things had to be worked out after all. As we took a 1-0 lead at Newcastle, we were looking at potential new homes. We looked at some at Charlton, which were okay, but I didn't really want to live in Charlton. As we went 2-1 down at Newcastle, we viewed another flat in Beckenham and put down the deposit money straight away. Another problem sorted. The flat was dealt with, promotion wasn't. Defeat at Newcastle made life very awkward. It meant that if Sunderland got a point at Port Vale, we couldn't catch 6th place. Sunderland won. Port Vale had done a Chelsea on us. It meant that the last 2 home games against Leicester and Wolves, which had both been made all ticket in anticipation of a grandstand finale, would be something of an anticlimax. But we found something in both matches to retain the interest. The game against Leicester saw the return of David Kelly. We just waited for him to score the winning goal against us, but surprisingly he played for Leicester in exactly the same way he'd done for us, falling over at every opportunity and generally being ineffective. Leroy Rossini was back from injury and scored a great-headed goal. Kevin Keane knocked in a penalty rebound and Trevor Morley scored a third in a 3-1 win. That just left Wolves. The final Saturday of the season had a carnival atmosphere about it. It was a bright sunny day, and although we knew we couldn't get promotion, we also knew we couldn't get relegated. Wolves too were out of the fight, and we looked forward to a feast of football. The more optimistic among us were already looking forward to next season. If we showed the same commitment under Billy Bonds, then surely promotion was a formality. Liam Brady had decided to retire, and this was to be his last competitive game. The Hammer of the Year trophy went to Julian Dix, with Trevor Morley and Stuart Slater runners-up. The game lived up to all our expectations. Although there wasn't the commitment that the team had shown against Blackburn, I would go as far as to say that the first 45 minutes against Wolves that afternoon was the best display of attacking football I'd ever seen from a West Ham side. The movement off the ball was fantastic. The passing was crisp and accurate. The only department slightly lacking was finishing. Had that been on song, we could have been in double figures by half-time. As it was, we had to settle for two almost identical goals, both diving headers from Trevor Morley and Kevin Keane. In the second half, Stuart Robson, playing his last full game for West Ham, strode through the Wolves' half and unleashed an unstoppable shot. Cue Liam Brady. The script could have been written just for him, as with just a couple of minutes remaining, he danced through the Wolves' defence and curled the ball into the top corner. The crowd flooded onto the pitch to greet their hero in the now traditional end-of-season celebration. I remained on the terrace on the North Bank, not through some snobbish reluctance to mix with the euphoric mass, but I was daydreaming. I had a vision of the crowd invading the pitch at the end of 1990-91 to greet a second division championship and a glorious return to Division 1. I had a vision of great new players arriving at the club, together with the emergence of youthful talent and the useful experience of older players. Then I woke up. Another summer. For the first time since 1958, England would be at the World Cup finals without a West Ham player in the squad. Failure was guaranteed. More importantly, Karen and I had to move to the new flat in Leonard Road and sort out our own situation. I didn't want to split up, but the lows were getting lower, the silences quieter, and the gaps between wonderful sex longer. Having installed ourselves in the new flat, I went to Phil's stag night, the only man in the pub who wasn't a policeman, and yet the only one who was able to win their silly games, drinking or otherwise. Karen went to Anne-Marie's hen night, and we met afterwards at Charing Cross Station. She assured me she hadn't had too much to drink as she threw up all over me on the train. It was the last train home and it was packed. I was wearing my best suit and was not amused. I was embarrassed publicly and then embarrassed privately as I took my suit to the dry cleaners the next day. Karen then compounded the felony by removing her dress to find she had a gashed knee and promptly fainted. I had to get her down to casualty in a taxi, praying she wouldn't puke again, then negotiate the triage system, get her patched up and ready for the wedding in 2 days' time. They were getting to know us quite well at Bromley Casualty. We were on first-name terms. I'd never been there before I met Karen. Now, after close encounters with a corned beef tin, a set of stepladders and a pair of pinking shears, we were season ticket holders. When I finally got her home, we'd both sobered up, and she was feeling randy. I wasn't interested. It was the last but one straw that broke this camel's back. The last one came just before the start of the new season. I was livid. I didn't want the lads to get upset at such a critical stage. It could affect confidence if the boys knew I was unsettled. Chapter 54. It's all over now. Tottenham Hotspur 4, West Ham United 1. 17th of August 1990. Ray Clement's testimonial. West Ham scored 80 league goals in 1989-90. That was pretty good going and a good sign for things to come. In all competitions, the total was 99. Defensive frailties had proved to be the undoing and were the biggest concern about a return to the top flight. The weekend before the start of the season saw 2 testimonial games take place, an unusual fact in itself, made even more strange by the fact that they were both for goalkeepers. On Friday, West Ham played Spurs at White Hart Lane in a benefit match for Ray Clements. On the Sunday, Ipswich Town visited Upton Park in a testimonial game for Phil Parkes. I travelled to the Tottenham game alone, straight from the office, meeting a fellow lone traveller on the tube, and we watched the game together. Nothing unusual about the game. Spurs had a good side with Gascoigne and Lineker at their peak after the World Cup. One would have expected them to win, especially as it was a benefit game for a Tottenham player. On the Saturday night, I'd been due to go to a party on my own. Karen had finished her year at work. Unable to stand her a minute longer than was absolutely necessary, they'd released her dead on 12 months. I, on the other hand, being sweet and lovable, and the author of this book and therefore able to create whatever impression I like, was allowed to stay on until I went back to college. I got on well with everyone at Farrah's and was grateful for the chance to keep working. What pissed me off was coming home at 7 in the evening and finding Karen had been lounging around watching TV all day, while the flat looked like a small nuclear weapon had gone off in the lounge. I encouraged her to get a part-time job, and she got one behind the bar of a local pub, which meant working unsociable hours. It did at least give me the chance to do a bit of socialising alone, and I'd fully intended to go to the party, but after taking Karen to work on the Saturday night, I looked at my surroundings, the pile of ironing in the corner, the dirty dishes in the sink, and decided to blitz the flat instead. With the flat spick and span, I finally retired to bed. Exciting, this little story, isn't it? I awoke at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning to find the other side of the bed empty. I took a quick look around the flat to see if Karen had crashed out on the sofa so as not to disturb me, but she was not that considerate. She was nowhere to be seen. It was a measure of my resignation that I ignored her absence and went back to sleep. I woke again at 8 and phoned the pub. I spoke to an extremely irate manager who said she'd slept over at the pub because she'd finished very late and was very tired. I demanded to speak to her. She trudged from her bed, blissfully unaware of the fact that I really didn't give a toss, but I was going to make the bitch stew for this. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded. "Oh, I was tired. Too tired to call me and let me know you weren't coming home?" "Oh, I'm sorry." "I should fucking well think so." Slammed the phone down. Very convincing. I decided to leave the flat immediately in case she had any ideas about coming straight over to explain. I went over to Anne-Marie's house, which took an hour and a half, during which time Karen had already rung her. "Karen just phoned," Anne-Marie said. "She wanted to know if you were here and you were angry." "What did you tell her?" "Told her I'd be bloody angry if I was Rob." "Nice one, Anne-Marie. Put the kettle on." I told Anne-Marie all about what had been going on, and despite being her best friend, she advised me to walk away. I wasn't sure. In a perfect world, Karen would walk away from me. I didn't want to have to go back to my parents with my tail between my legs, but then this isn't a perfect world. In a perfect world, West Ham would do better than a 1-1 draw against Ipswich in a testimonial game. The match was like a West Ham old boys reunion. Billy played for our side, and the visiting team included Alan Devonshire, who'd moved on to Watford, Jeff Pike, who was at Notts County, Bobby Barnes from Northampton Town, and Paul Goddard, who was trying to resurrect his career at Millwall. Jimmy Quinn inevitably scored for us, and I went home to face Karen. She was hiding under a quilt on the sofa. I ripped it off and asked for an explanation. "Do you want to try again?" she asked. "No," I said, staring out the window. "I've had enough." Karen had nowhere to go. Her brother only had a tiny flat, and she couldn't go back to her parents because she needed to be in the area to go back to college. The flat at Leonard Road was a contractual obligation. We had to keep it until November, so I agreed she could stay at the flat while I packed a few things and went back to Mum and Dad. A very difficult and, in hindsight, brave thing to do. My first phone call on Monday morning was to a good pal of mine, Kevin. Kevin had been going out with one of Karen's friends, and we'd become close mates. He'd just graduated from Southampton University and was working as a solicitor in Bromley. He was an idealist and a confirmed right-winger, a young conservative and proud of it. He had ambition too. He still has. Watch this space. This guy wants to be Prime Minister and seriously believes he'll make it. Both myself and Michael Heseltine have our doubts, however. Kevin invited me to a reception held by the President of the Board of Trade. Kevin's MP introduced us to Heseltine, saying that Kevin had a burning desire to be a politician. "Is that right?" Heseltine asked. "You like to be Prime Minister?" Kev put on his best yes minister voice and replied mockingly, "Well, if my country saw fit to call upon my talents, I would seriously consider it." Heseltine looked at him and said, "Might as well not bother." I laughed. Heseltine had his own reasons for doubting that Kevin would be Prime Minister. I had my own. Who ever heard of a Prime Minister called Kevin? He had a sympathetic ear in those days. He'd listened when we'd been to the theatre as a foursome with his girlfriend a few weeks earlier and was half expecting the news. He was upset when I'd told him we'd finished. He said he liked Karen. I said I'd like Karen if I didn't have to live with her. He just laughed and bought me another pint. It was during these troubled times that I realised how many good friends I did have. I was very lucky. My parents supported me through thick and thin. I still haven't found anything to blame them for. My bed was waiting for me when I turned up that Sunday evening, and both Mum and Dad revealed that they didn't like Karen in the first place. I'd thought as much, but it's not the sort of thing you tell your son, is it? My sisters were both delighted that I got shot of her. They were always suspicious of her motives. I was just blinded by her body. On several occasions I went back to the flat to pick up clothes and possessions, and on 2 occasions we ended up back in bed. In the end it made me hate her for being a tart, but if the truth be known, I was the biggest slag of them all. Since I met Karen, I've never had a pure thought in my head, and I doubt I ever will again. At work, things continued to rumble along. They all knew Karen quite well because she used to come to the office and meet me after work, and to check I wasn't feeling Jackie up behind the filing cabinet. They were all shocked too. "We thought you were perfect for one another," they all said. Just goes to show how wrong you can be. On the opening day of the season, I was still up to my neck in books, records, tapes, football programmes and financial settlements. The fact we'd drawn 0-0 at Middlesbrough was incidental. Close used to work around the corner from me, and he came to the office to meet me before the game against Portsmouth. My colleague, Rod MacLeod, a professional Scotsman and brilliant wit, remarked the next morning that he didn't think much of my new girlfriend. The first home game of the season was a disappointing 1-1 draw with Portsmouth. We needed to win every home game. A draw was not acceptable. At least Frank McAvenny showed that he might be back on form and scored the first goal in his second spell at the club. The following Saturday we played Watford at Upton Park. It was an action replay of the previous season's game, winning 1-0 with a Julian Dix penalty, but the performance was far from convincing. Close and I were going to more and more games together. Most of the others had dropped out. Beanhead came along occasionally, and Staintooth was still a regular, but the original gang was depleted. Close couldn't be bothered to go to Leicester. After the performance we'd witnessed against Watford, we felt the only logical result was defeat. Instead, we watched the video highlights of season 89-90 at his flat and wondered if we would make it this season. We flipped channels for the football results. We'd won 2-1. Maybe we would. Chapter 55. Here I Go Again. Newcastle United 1, West Ham United 1, 22nd of September 1990. I wasn't looking forward to going back to college. I would have to make sure I got my side of the story in before Madam did. Rule number 1 in broken relationships: always get your revenge in first. I splashed out on a season ticket for the West Stand, determined to get a good view of our promotion campaign. That meant watching the game away from the others. It was a weird situation. Staintooth had an East Terrace season ticket and Close stood on the North Bank, so we would travel to the game together, then go off in different directions to watch it and meet up again afterwards. It made for interesting conversations on the way home because each of us had seen the game from a different angle. September the 15th, 1990 was the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. This was a subject that had always fascinated me. Indeed, my first ambition in life was to be a Spitfire pilot. I was most upset when I realised that Spitfires were no longer in service with the RAF and that the Second World War wouldn't start up again just for my benefit. I went with Dad up to Trafalgar Square to watch a very impressive RAF fly past. As the aircraft flew overhead, everyone started clapping. This has always bothered me. Why do people clap when they know they can't be heard? I'd experienced the same at the live screening of the Leeds game at Upton Park. The crowd was singing and chanting as though the team could reap some kind of benefit. It's like people clapping after seeing a film at the cinema. Well done, projectionist. Jolly good show. After the fly past, we had a spot of lunch and wandered across to Upton Park for the game against Wolves. We saw another mildly disappointing performance. I hated to say it, but Frank McAvenny was just not hitting it off with Trevor Morley up front. Morley was the one of the two who was looking sharper, and I called for Jimmy the Tree Quinn to be reinstated. Alvin Martin scored our goal against Wolves. West Ham fans will never learn. They baited Steve Bull for fully 75 minutes before he buried the equaliser past Ludo. Another home draw was not what the doctor ordered. Bonds finally saw sense in the next game at home to John Lyall's Ipswich. It appeared to be one of those games where the old master would come back and teach the young whippersnapper a lesson, like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker locked in mortal combat with their lightsabers. Well, a bit like that. Ipswich took the lead and held it well into the second half when Bishop squeezed in an equaliser. It looked like another draw, but Bonds threw Quinn on and immediately produced the winner. Morley scored a third and we were away. Kevin had taken it upon himself to cheer me up after my break-up with Karen. He couldn't grasp the concept that I was actually quite pleased to be out of it. He was determined to get me fixed up again without delay. The following Saturday I was suffering badly with a cold. I had a sore throat, a runny nose and was feeling awful when Kevin rang and asked if I would make up a 4 to go to a nightclub. West Ham had drawn at Newcastle. I was in a reasonable mood but was hardly fit to go out clubbing. I tried to make an excuse, but he was having none of it. He came over and persuaded me that I'd feel much better for it. His new girlfriend, Liz, was bringing one of her friends, and she was really pretty, and I would soon forget all about my sore throat. I already knew Liz, but I'd never met Jenny before. She was, as Kevin said, a pretty girl, about my height, short black hair. I wasn't interested. For a start, she was younger than me. Even Karen had been 6 months older. The prospect of going out with a young woman just didn't appeal. She didn't seem that interested either, but made an effort to please Liz, and so did I to keep Kevin happy. I danced a slow dance with Jenny and we all said goodbye. I thought no more about it. Every time Kevin phoned, he'd ask me if I had spoken to Jenny. Why should I have done that? I would ask him. I thought you liked her, he said. I do, but then I like your gran. It doesn't mean I want to go out with her on a regular basis. She'd say yes if you asked her. Who, your gran? No, Jenny, stupid. I wasn't convinced at first, but the more I thought about it, the more attractive the idea became. Considering Kevin thought she'd be such a pushover, I found her a tough nut to crack. It was 8 months before I persuaded her it would be a good idea to be alone with me. Although West Ham was still unbeaten, the performances left a lot to be desired. A 3-0 win over Stoke City in the latest version of the League Cup, the Rumbelows Cup, helped. Then a confidence-boosting 1-1 draw at Hillsborough against Sheffield Wednesday side that could have buried us alive in the first half had it not been for some poor finishing and some inspired goalkeeping. I listened to the game on the car radio, driving home from my grandmother's house in Hailsham. When we went 1-0 down, I knew we would come back. It's a rare feeling as a West Ham supporter. Another patchy performance saw us win 2-0 against Oxford. As Stuart Slater in his post-match interview said, when we finally put it together, someone's in for a right pasting. That someone turned out to be Hull City the following Saturday. It was a horrible October day. There was a lot of rubbish floating around on the pitch even before the teams came out. To add to it, the wind was swirling around and there was a hint of rain. It was very unpleasant. Jimmy Quinn opened the scoring, but Hull equalised and we feared a repeat of the previous season's debacle. However, straight from the kick-off, Steve Potts surged forward and hit a shot the Hull keeper could only let slip through his legs. Potts had scored at last. Not the best goal in the world, but a goal nonetheless. He was no longer a girly goal-scoring virgin. In the second half, West Ham stopped messing about and made up for lost time. Morley won a penalty which Dix converted. Parrish scored a fourth. Quinn got a fifth, Morley the sixth, before Dix rounded it off with a superb solo goal to make it 7-1 at full time. It was the biggest win since the 8-1 win over Newcastle, and we all celebrated accordingly. After all, it's not every day that any team scores 7, let alone West Ham United. Chapter 56. Double Dutch. West Ham United 1, Blackburn Rovers 0. 24th of October 1990. After spanking Hull City, we faced 3 away games in a row. At Stoke, we completed the second round Rumbelows Cup win with a 2-1 victory. Martin Allen scored his first 2 of the season. Frank McAvenny was struggling to get into the side. At Bristol City, he came off the bench to score an equaliser in a 1-1 draw. A week later, he went one better and came off the bench to score the winner at Swindon. The season had progressed well. After a dodgy start, 14 games unbeaten and 3rd place behind Oldham Athletic and Sheffield Wednesday. With 3 going up automatically and 1 more via the playoffs, it was our best chance of getting back into the First Division. Just as my season ticket came through, I discovered I had to go away on a trip with college. It was supposed to be a 5-day excursion to a European capital city, but turned into a full-scale piss-up, with only token resistance put up by our lecturers and organisers. We had a choice of Madrid, Paris or Amsterdam. I fancied Madrid, but saw that Karen had already put her name down, so I went for Amsterdam as I'd already been to Paris. The drinking started on the 7-hour ferry crossing to the Hook of Holland and stopped on the crossing back to Felixstowe. Someone bought a bottle of peach schnapps and was sharing it around. I developed a bit of a taste for it, and 5 or 6 of us went to the duty-free shop to buy our own bottles. I tried to phone home to find out how we'd got on against Blackburn Rovers. I discovered that you can't ring 0898 numbers from overseas. Tried Mum and Dad but couldn't get through. The next morning I rang Close at work. He'd borrowed my season ticket, so the least he could do was spare me a few minutes to tell me the score. "Where are you ringing from?" he asked. "Amsterdam," I said. He was so shocked it took him a few minutes to tell me we'd won 1-0 with a goal from Ian Bishop. That was all I wanted to know. Anything else was just costing me money. We came home knowing we would have to justify the trip by producing some sort of project and/or presentation, which we did as a group just before Christmas. The way we put across the presentation, you could have believed we'd actually done some work while we were there. In the meantime, I finally managed to get some use out of my season ticket for the home game against Charlton. Martin Allen got another brace in a 2-1 win, and the run continued. The same gang who had made the trip to Oxford in 1986 retraced their footsteps in 1990 for the Rumbelows Cup tie. We even found the same parking spot in the middle of a roundabout. We arrived at the ground just as Trevor Morley put us in front, but the writing was on the wall right from the moment Oxford equalised and missed a penalty. We thought we'd be lucky to get a replay. That proved to be the case. Oxford scored right at the end to give them the win they deserved. That was the end of the 16-match unbeaten run, but the league run continued. Me and Close drove up to Notts County, again missing the kick-off as we still had to park in the cattle market after being held up in roadworks. County's ground, Meadow Lane, was a shambles. The toilets were a slit in the ground and a wall to piss against. The catering facilities offered such delights as hot meat pies that burned your lips on the outside while being full of ice in the middle. It was basically a tip. At least Morley's goal in the second half lit up an otherwise miserable day. Julian Dix had succumbed to an injury that would rule him out for over a year. In his place, West Ham signed Chris Hughton on loan from Tottenham, and he proved to be an adequate replacement, but he was never going to be another Dixie. After driving home from Nottingham, resisting the temptation to pop in and see Christina, I dropped Close off, got changed and went to a party in Orpington. Who should be there but Jenny, looking pretty as a picture. She didn't want anything to do with me, though. Kevin had split up with Liz and broken her heart in the process. Jenny assumed that as a friend of Kevin I must be tarred with the same brush. Silly cow. A week later we played Millwall at the Den. There were fights going off all over the place, in the car park, at the station and in the ground. The match seemed to be the last thing on everyone's mind. When it finally got underway, Frank McAvenny scored our goal in a 1-1 draw, which secured second spot behind a rampant Oldham Athletic. After the game, we tried to get out of the queue and take a train to Beckenham, but the police wouldn't let us. We had to take a train to Whitechapel with the other sheep. Bloody marvellous. That put an extra hour on my journey time and meant I was walking down my road at exactly the same time as Karen, who was walking to her Saturday night bar job. "I see you can still afford to go to football then," she said bitterly in reference to my reluctance to give her share of the deposit money for the flat. The fact that I'd paid for her to stay in the flat for 3 months, around £900, didn't seem to enter the equation. On the Monday night, West Ham played Tottenham in a testimonial game for Billy Bonds. Guess what? We won 4-3 and Bill scored the winner from the penalty spot. Who says these games are contrived? Me, that's who. Chapter 57. A New Flame. Barnsley 1, West Ham United 0. 22nd of December 1990. West Ham came from behind to beat Brighton 2-1 at Upton Park, and news filtered through that Oldham had lost for the first time that season to Port Vale. A perfect day. The euphoria experienced in winning a game is multiplied exponentially when coming from behind. It hits the roof when your nearest rivals lose as well. The unbeaten league run was now 17 as we travelled to Plymouth and became the first team to win there that season. The score was 1-0, Frank McAvenny scoring. Oldham lost again and we went top of the table. We could do no wrong. Reputations were laid waste, and but for a slight aberration at Oxford, we'd forgotten what it was like to lose. A 19th game unbeaten came at home to West Brom, 3-1. Frankie's goal, the third, was an exquisite lob from about 40 yards. It was a pity that we'd been knocked out of the Rumbelows Cup, because it would have been nice to test our all-conquering team against some First Division opposition. In retrospect, perhaps it's better that we didn't play higher-placed opposition sooner. Otherwise, the fatal flaws in the team may have been exposed earlier than they were. We made it 20 at Portsmouth, Trevor Morley scoring the winner, and 21 against Middlesbrough, albeit in a disappointing 0-0 draw. Now then, I haven't mentioned Luton Town for a while, have I? Our brief outing in the ZDS Cup took place at my favourite club, and Bonds showed how important he felt the competition was by making 5 changes to the side, including Alan McKnight in goal. If Bonds hadn't wanted to take part in the competition, it would have been a lot less painful all round if we'd just withdrawn. The combination of playing Luton away on their plastic pitch with McKnight in goal was potentially disastrous, and it proved to be in practice. Luton won 5-1, and our goal was a dodgy penalty which was only scored on the rebound. Another good reason to hate Luton. Although not a vital competition, the damaging effect was that confidence was knocked for the trip to Barnsley, another of our favourite sides, and they ended our record 21-match unbeaten league run. Removed from the top of the table, it was not the best preparation for our Boxing Day clash with nearest rivals Oldham. Meanwhile, I badgered away at Jenny. I was going to get her if it was the last thing I did. Whenever I knew she was going to a party, I phoned to offer her a lift. What a creep. On Christmas Eve, I took her a huge bouquet of flowers as a Christmas present, making out that I did the same for all my female friends. Yeah, right, students can afford to do that, can't they? She got me a present too, a drinks holder for the car. Somehow I detected a reserve present feeling about it. I didn't worry. I knew I had no serious competitors for her affection, and I knew if I remained patient, I would succeed. On Boxing Day, we beat Oldham 2-0, and everything seemed to be back on course. Oldham was surprisingly easy meat. I felt sure we'd have to fight every inch of the way, but goals from Morley and Slater saw us through, and we could even afford a missed penalty from Jimmy Quinn. Lack of success from the spot highlighted the fact that we were missing Julian Dix in more ways than one. It should have been just as easy to get past Port Vale, but by the end of the game we were grateful for a point in a goalless draw. Darren Beckford had a wonderful chance to inflict our first home defeat, but hit the side netting. The game was played on a pitch that was ankle deep in water in places, more suitable for water polo than football. That evening, a mutual friend of Kevin and I, Brett, unexpectedly turned up at a party. He was sorry to hear that Karen and I had split up. I was surprised he remembered her. Of course I remember her, he said. She was that loud bird with the big tits. I had to agree, his description was painfully accurate. On New Year's Eve, I dashed between 2 parties, seeing in the new year with a former school friend who was combining a New Year's party with a housewarming. It was a real trip down memory lane for me, the majority of the guests being former pupils at Balgowan, my primary school. I perfected my get pissed quick technique of pouring a good measure of whiskey into a can of Guinness. The heathen didn't have any Irish whiskey, but Scotch seemed to do the trick. It was so nice to see so many old friends, even if they were all drunk and more successful than me. The new year started well, Jimmy Quinn scoring the winner at Bristol Rovers. The FA Cup campaign began in rather odd fashion. We'd drawn 4th Division Aldershot away, but they decided to switch the tie to Upton Park to maximise potential income. That meant for the first time, certainly in my memory, West Ham played a competitive fixture at Upton Park wearing their away strip. Did I say competitive? I beg your pardon, I meant crap. It was hard to see any cup success coming from a performance like that. OK, technically we were away from home, but let's face it, we were at home, against a team that next season would go out of the league. The former QPR keeper, Peter Hucker, kept goal for Aldershot and played reasonably well, but he could have got away with an off day, we were that poor. As Bonds admitted afterwards, we could have played until midnight and still not scored. Our FA Cup dreams were shattered when the draw was made for the 4th round. Luton away. Good night and thank you. The new police directives meant that we had to wait 10 days for the replay, and in between Morley scored another goal at Watford to set us off on another little run. The replay against Aldershot finally exposed the difference between the two sides. We were 4-1 up at half-time through Morley, Slater, Paris and Bishop. Ludo made an uncharacteristic error in allowing Aldershot to pull one back, but if he was going to make an error, this was the night to do it. Morley and Quinn added a couple more towards the end, and we ran out 6-1 winners. The following Saturday we beat Leicester at Upton Park to complete the second double of the season, George Paris scoring the only goal. It was worrying that we were not scoring more goals. I know football fans are never happy, and we were top of the league, but Oldham were winning matches by 3s and 4s, whereas we were just scraping through. If the defence decided to have an off period, we were in trouble. We expected defeat at Luton. We had the chance to watch it on those marvellous big screens at Upton Park, as Luton had allocated us only half a dozen tickets. Hopes were raised as we appeared to be playing quite well and scored just before half-time through George Paris again, his 3rd goal in a row. Kingsley Black equalised in the second half, but a 1-1 draw was a much better result than we could have wished for. It gave us a chance to test our unbeaten home record against them in a replay. Chapter 58. It's a thin line between love and hate. West Ham United 5, Luton Town 0. 31st of January 1991. The whole point of buying a season ticket, as far as I was concerned, was that I would never have to miss a game at Upton Park through arriving late or being unable to get a ticket via normal channels. I knew that the replay against Luton would not be covered by my season ticket. It only covered 2 cup ties, and they'd been taken account of by the 2 games against Aldershot. Tim had said he'd wanted to go to the replay, so not to bother booking a ticket for my usual seat. I could watch it with him on the North Bank and save myself a few bob in the process. I reluctantly agreed, feeling that we would have to get there very early to ensure a good position. It was the day before the game that Tim hit me with the suggestion that he bring his girlfriend Nikki as well. It didn't bother me, but we had to pick her up from Guy's Hospital, where she worked. This made the journey to Upton Park by car very awkward. We got to the Rotherhithe Tunnel bang on schedule, but then hit a traffic jam, which saw us locked bumper to bumper all the way to Upton Park. We raced around to the main gates to find they'd been locked. Ticket holders only. I looked at Tim and Nikki and raised my hands as if to strangle them both, but realised it was futile to lose my temper. To make matters worse, the programmes had all sold out, so I had nothing to read while I listened to the game at home on the radio. To this day it remains the only home programme missing from my collection. It's almost symbolic, the missing Luton programme, testimony to my undying hatred for the club. The fact that we won 5-0 did not pacify me. In fact, it made matters worse. If we'd lost, I could have been philosophical about it and said, well, I didn't miss anything then. But we beat Luton, and we beat them 5-0, and I wasn't there to see it. It was criminal. I listened to the demolition job via sketchy reports on the radio. As Morley stroked in the 5th, I felt like crying. Watching the highlights on the TV later that night didn't help. What did help was a cushy 5th round draw at home to Crewe Alexandra. Into February and a rare league defeat. This time it was Wolverhampton Wanderers who beat us 2-1 at Molineux. It was a day for unexpected results. Chelsea unexpectedly beat Arsenal for their one and only league defeat of the season, and I unexpectedly went to watch Welling United against Aylesbury Town in an FA Trophy game. I can't remember the score, it was that boring, but I had gone along to keep Kevin company and try and take my mind off the game against Wolves. It didn't work because the bloke standing next to us had a radio and kept shouting the scores out. It was a bitterly cold day, a prelude to the bad weather that forced postponements in our next matches at home to Newcastle and away at Ipswich. It meant the next game was the 5th round tie against Crewe. Kevin came along, under protest, claiming to be a Liverpool supporter, even though he knew nothing about football. He knew less than the average club chairman. Actually, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. As always happens when bringing guests along, West Ham played like a bunch of tarts and only scraped a 1-0 win with Jimmy Quinn coming off the bench to notch the winner. Crewe played well and deserved more, but I wasn't complaining. We'd made it to the quarter-finals. Wembley wasn't such a distant dream after all. A home draw and we were virtually guaranteed a semi-final place. The draw was indeed at home to Liverpool or Everton. It took them 3 goes to settle their 5th round match, a draw at Anfield followed by a classic 4-4 draw at Goodison when Tony Cottee came on as a substitute and scored twice for Everton. After that game, Kenny Dalglish resigned and Everton won the second replay 1-0. Meanwhile, we picked up our league trail with a 3-1 win over Millwall at Upton Park. We were still top, but Oldham always remained in striking distance. The biggest gap there had ever been was 4 points, hardly enough to spark off premature championship celebrations, but we had to be happy with the fact we were top. Millwall proved the point that the more you taunt a player, the more likely he is to score. Their fans sang to Ian Bishop, "Where's your caravan?" as he trotted across to the south bank to take a corner. He floated the corner over and Frank scored the opener. Beautiful. Another disappointing result followed, a 0-0 draw at West Brom. As front-runners, we should have been winning at venues like the Hawthorns, where West Bromwich Albion had managed only 5 wins all season. That disappointment was nothing compared to the shock of hearing the news that Trevor Morley had been injured in a domestic argument. We never did get to the bottom of that story. Whatever the truth, it robbed us of our top scorer for the game against Plymouth, and our lack of cutting edge cost us dear, as we let in 2 goals at home for the first time in a 2-2 draw. Paris had a chance to win the game from the spot near the end, but it would have been rough justice on Plymouth. It was not good preparation for the visit of Everton in the Cup quarter-final. This time I took no chances. Despite Tim's protests, I applied for my usual seat in the West Stand and watched the game from there, while he sat at home unable to get a North Bank ticket. Sorry, Tim. It was one of those great nights at Upton Park. There was a buzz in the air before the game, and the team played with 120% commitment. Colin Foster scored a goal of such quality, it had to be a fluke. I'm sorry, Colin, but you can't put your hand on your heart and honestly say you meant to pivot like a wild dervish and send an unstoppable volley into the top corner of the net. It was a fluke. The team deserved it. Stuart Slater doubled his transfer value with a display which combined skill and aggression. He chased back, tackled, ran at the Everton defence and shot accurately in such a way that reminded me of Brian Robson at his peak. Not Pop, the crap one who played for England a few times and was always injured. Slater deservedly scored the second goal before West Ham let in the traditional goal at the end just to make the last few minutes a bit more exciting. After all, it would be no fun to be 2-0 up with a minute to go, would it? We already knew it would be Nottingham Forest in the semi-final because our quarter-final was played on the Monday following Forest's win over Norwich in their quarter-final. The other semi was going to be between Tottenham and Arsenal for the first time ever at Wembley Stadium. The win over Everton went to the players' heads. Admittedly, it was a bit unfair to be expected to pick up the pace for a league match against Oxford just 2 days later, and they lost 2-1. Even worse followed the next Saturday when the home record went. To be fair to Sheffield Wednesday, they played us off the park. We had a spell in the second half when we looked dangerous and pulled the score level, but there was never really any doubt who was going to win the game. Paul Williams, the West Ham fan who had destroyed us when playing for Charlton 2 seasons previously, repeated the dose. Another player who had caused us headaches in the past was Franz Carr. I'd always been impressed by his pace and crossing ability when playing for Nottingham Forest, and was delighted when he came on loan. However, he played like a complete gimp, and the less I say about it, the better. Bristol City came and provided us with 3 points we needed to get the confidence flowing again, but at a cost. Tony Gale's free kick was enough to win the game, but Frankie was sent off and thereby ruled out of the Cup semi-final. On the Saturday, while the boys ground out a 0-0 draw at Hull, Tim and I queued at Upton Park for our semi-final tickets. We got there at 9 and left at 4. I'd grown a beard by the time I got my ticket. We bought train tickets at the same time and circled the date in our diaries. We were excited. Although we'd seen a semi-final before, they'd been home and away affairs. This was a major showpiece one-off on neutral ground, Villa Park. Thoughts of the semi-final had to go to the back of the mind for the time being. Not only did we have a hectic league programme over Easter and the 2 weeks leading up to the semi, but I faced my finals in June and had to set about some serious revision. On Good Friday we played Oldham at Boundary Park and earned a creditable 1-1 draw. Ludo played blinder and saved our skins in the first half. In the second half, Ritchie handled on the line, should have been sent off, and Bishop scored the penalty. At last we'd found a decent replacement for Dix from the spot, we thought. The hero worship was obviously too much for Bish, and he immediately rushed up the other end of the penalty box and whipped Gunnar Halle in the face with his hair. Ritchie equalised, and a draw seemed a good result, as we'd won the series against Oldham, a win and a draw. On Easter Monday, I just happened to turn up at a pub in Sevenoaks where Jenny was having a drink with Liz. I didn't quite resort to begging, but it would have been quite amusing to have stood back and watched myself try and persuade her to go out with me. Every time I failed, I asked myself why I did it. I didn't need it. 10 minutes later, I convinced myself once again that I did. I had to rush to get to my seat against Barnsley. By half-time, I wished I hadn't bothered. 2-0 down. I was beginning to think that Barnsley were just one of those teams we were destined to lose to at vital times. If West Ham as a club ever died, their tombstone would read, "If it hadn't been for Luton, Barnsley, Chelsea and Notts County." Bonds must have thrown a few cups around in their dressing room at half-time, because the boys came out and turned it around 3-2. I was amazed. We had a new signing, Ian Dowie, who had won the Football League Mr. Ugly competition 6 seasons running, and only scored goals because the opposition defenders couldn't bear to be photographed with him. I remembered watching him in our 5-0 win over Luton thinking, "Yep, that Ian Dowie looks really crap." Sure enough, within a few weeks he was a West Ham player. He did nothing for the whole game against Barnsley except score our equaliser. I hate players who do that. I couldn't work out why Bonds had bought him. If it was cover for the cup semi, it wasn't such a hot idea because Dowie was cup-tied. Morley was on the way back and Quinn was still the apple of my eye. Why complicate matters? The game against Barnsley was the last home game before the cup semi, and we gave the team an appropriate send-off. There were still 2 games to be played though. At Port Vale we won 1-0 through a fine Ian Bishop goal. The stadium at Vale Park ran Meadow Lane a close second for quality, but at least the pies were hot all the way through. Our preparation was naturally completed by a defeat, 1-0 at Brighton. That was the first and last time I've ever watched a game progress on CFAX. It makes phoning club call seem like actually being there. Despite the fact we were without Trevor Morley, Frank McAvenny and Ian Dowie for the semi-final, I remained quietly confident of a result. After all, it was our 3rd semi-final in succession. It had to be 3rd time lucky. Chapter 59. I don't want to talk about it. Nottingham Forest 4, West Ham United 0. 14th of April 1991. FA Cup semi-final. Well, I don't want to talk about it if that's okay. I'd much rather talk about something else. Ah yes, the wonderful Helen. Remember her from Chapter 1? Alarmingly as it may seem, she arrived back on the scene as a friend of Liz and Jenny's. I can visualise you all now saying, "Hang on a minute, Banksy, that's just a little bit too convenient for us to believe." Well, they say truth is stranger than fiction, and that's what happened, so there. She'd got rid of her pigtails and her holier-than-thou attitude, but she still walked around with her nose in the air. It was such a nice nose that I let her off. At first I didn't twig who she was, but it all came flooding back to me in a dream. She looked just like Daryl Hannah, and for all I know, probably tasted like her as well. Kevin was smitten. He wouldn't admit it, but he fancied her something rotten, and I couldn't blame him. For my part, there was still the awkward matter of Jenny to negotiate. Kevin and I made a pact to help each other in our quest for personal satisfaction. Still don't want to talk about the semi-final, or Keith Hackett. After all, there may be children reading. We just lost, and that was that. Trevor Morley came back from his stabbing to score the winner at Ipswich, and set us up with a chance to clinch promotion the following Saturday at home to Swindon. Swindon were a bit of a giggle. They'd won the playoff final at Wembley against Sunderland, then Lou Macari's misdemeanours cost them their place in the First Division. Instead of playing the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal every week, they struggled to avoid relegation to the Third Division under new manager Glenn Hoddle. You had to laugh. I had thought it was a bit strong that having relegated Swindon, they automatically gave Sunderland a place in the First Division as playoff runners-up. It would have been fairer to start the playoffs again with the team in 7th place taking part. Guess who finished 7th? Well, it would have been fairer, wouldn't it? Swindon obligingly laid down and died, allowing us to win 2-0. All we needed was the right result from Barnsley. If they failed to win, we were up. There was a hushed silence around the ground when the announcer stated that Barnsley had drawn 1-1 and West Ham were a First Division side once again. I don't recall being too elated about it. I remember feeling that it wasn't worth anything unless we won the title. Bonds made his first big managerial mistake. He was quoted in the press saying that the championship meant nothing, it was promotion that was the main thing. He was right, of course, in the financial sense, but he was being too honest. We wanted to hear him say that he wouldn't be happy until we'd beaten Oldham into submission and finished top of the pile. Admittedly, it looked like that would happen anyway, but the damage had already been done. The attitude appeared to be reflected in the players' performances against Newcastle United the following Wednesday. The main job had been done. They didn't want to overexert themselves. We managed a 1-1 draw, but deserved to lose in an appalling display of lethargy. I couldn't go to Blackburn Rovers, but did the next best thing and went to Ipswich to cheer them on in their game against Oldham. It was reminiscent of the game in which Oldham had beaten us 2-0 the previous season. Ipswich were like little boys against a very strong Oldham team who won 2-1. West Ham blew it at Blackburn, another team struggling against relegation. It seemed that now we were up, there was a combination of lack of effort on our part, together with the extra determination from the opposition to beat us. We lost 3-1 at Blackburn, all the goals coming in the first half. We were still top after that game, but I was so depressed as I drove back from Ipswich, you would have thought they'd taken promotion away from us. The trend wasn't healthy. I'd bought tickets for the bank holiday game at Charlton, but had what I perceived to be a better offer. A mate of mine, Ken, was desperately trying to get into Liz's knickers and invited her to join him for a weekend on his parents' narrowboat on the Grand Union Canal. To make it look kosher, he invited me and Jenny to join him. It was a great weekend. All four of us had a cracking time, and Dad enjoyed himself with my ticket at Charlton as we drew 1-1, opening the gap to 2 points as Oldham lost. The narrowboat weekend finally cracked the toughest nut I'd ever come across. Jenny finally agreed to go out with me, but I had to fork out a substantial amount of dosh to secure the deal, buying 2 tickets to see Paul Simon at Wembley Arena. Was it worth it? I asked myself as I wrote out the cheque. I decided it was. After all, when you've worked for something as hard as I had for this, it had to be worthwhile. I was achieving my own First Division status. The following Wednesday, we tentatively beat Bristol Rovers 1-0 with a Stuart Slater goal. It left the championship down to the final game. We were top, ahead of Oldham by 2 points. Sheffield Wednesday in third couldn't catch either of us. It was a straight fight. Our last game was against Notts County at Upton Park. Having already beaten them at Meadow Lane, we were confident of getting the right result, especially as Oldham had an equally tough game against Sheffield Wednesday at Boundary Park. It was knife-edge stuff. As long as we won, we were okay. A draw wouldn't be enough if Oldham won. Their goal difference knocked ours into a cocked hat. If we lost, we just had to pray that Wednesday would do us a favour. At half-time, it still looked good. We were 2-0 down, but then so were Oldham. If it finished like that, we were home and dry. Dust down the trophy cabinet, Mavis. Paris scored in the second half, but County were jostling for a good playoff position and were not going to give up. Even as the final whistle went, we were champions. Elton Welsby said so on the TV. The fans rushed onto the pitch to celebrate. The latest score from Oldham was a 2-2 draw and heading for injury time. We were champions by a point. Hold it. Oldham scored in the last minute and we lost the championship. To say we finished second sounds good, but when you consider the whole season was really a two-horse race, it was as good as finishing second in a boxing match. One fan summed it up as he left the ground and shouted through the dressing room window, "You f***ed up, West Ham!" It was a huge disappointment, so near and yet so far, so typically West Ham. I really don't want to talk about it. Chapter 60, the one and only. West Ham United 3, Aston Villa 1, 28th of August 1991. During the half-time interval at the Notts County game, the new West Ham kit for season 91-92 was paraded around the pitch. We all stood stunned and amazed, mouths open, looking at each other. Surely this was some kind of bizarre joke. Surely they didn't expect players to wear that, did they? It was worse than the old scoreline kit we had suffered between 87 and 89. It was an insult to the players who had to wear the claret and blue. The home strip was a kind of Picasso design. No one understood it. It was a claret shirt with blue and white stripes over the shoulders and around the bottom of the sleeves. The away kit was better, a slightly modified Argentina shirt. For the first time there was a third choice kit to waste your money on, all white with claret and blue trim. Revolting. I knew from that moment we would struggle. People would be rolling in the aisles the moment we took to the pitch, let alone when we started playing. I scraped through my degree exams despite the distractions of Jenny, who had now passed her driving test and was doing a passable impression of a limpet. Having struggled so hard to win her over, I now found that I couldn't shake her off. I wasn't used to it and I felt claustrophobic. We did, however, spend a very pleasant weekend in the Lake District over the weekend of my 23rd birthday, and on returning home, decided I'd better buckle down and find a job. The job market for surveyors was not the same in 1991 as it had been in 1989, when 3 companies were falling over themselves for my signature. Now I couldn't even get an interview. Things were tough. Although it wasn't exactly what I had in mind, I replied to an advert in the local paper for a residential sales negotiator with a local firm of estate agents, Jordan's, and to my surprise was called in for an interview. The company had recently been bought out by a local entrepreneur, a Mike Baldwin type character called Mike Larkman. I sat in his office for 4 hours while he, quote, interviewed, unquote, me. I think I spoke once, to ask for coffee with no sugar. His secretary was something else, a real fox. She was another Karen, and for ease of reference, dear reader, I'll call her Karen 2, because I know how confused you all get from time to time. I was bloody confused, I can tell you. After clapping eyes on Karen 2, I was determined to get the job. As it turned out, Mike was determined to give me the job and moved heaven and earth to make the position sound as attractive as possible. I had another year to go before I qualified as a chartered surveyor, and strictly speaking, Jordan's wasn't the right kind of company for me to gain experience to qualify. He therefore arranged for me to spend 2 days a week at his consultant building surveyors, Carroll and Roth, in Crystal Palace. By doing that, I was able to gain the necessary experience to qualify as a chartered surveyor in the autumn of '92, and would then be able to add an extra dimension to Jordan's business. Mike had it all worked out. The job seemed brilliant. There wasn't a great deal to do. The odd valuation, a bit of sales work, general paper shuffling, plus I got to sit opposite Karen 2, which was an added bonus. I was to receive a VW Golf 16-valve automatic with car phone, which immediately made me wet my pants. I'd never had a company car before, and the prospect of driving around in this monster was too much to handle. a real posemobile. The company was small, not what I was used to. There was just the one office. Mike was the managing director, Karen too was his secretary, and Elaine did the accounts. Mike's brother Phil acted as company secretary and would come into the office and make us all fall about laughing. It wasn't particularly funny, but he had an interesting line in training shoes. His feet were so big he always looked like he was wearing a couple of canoes on his feet. Meanwhile, I had trouble suppressing the canoe in my pocket as Karen too placed my coffee on the desk and wiggled out of the office. Blimey, I thought. I started at Jordan's on July the 1st. A week later my exam results came through. I had to rely on Tim to go and fetch them for me and read them out to me over the telephone. I knew I'd done enough to pass, but the grade was all important. I got a lower second, a 2-2, or a Desmond as we called them. Only 2 people got Jeffs, firsts, and the majority, including Tim, got upper seconds. Bastard. At least I didn't get a Douglas. That was it. College was out of the way, and I could add the letters BSc Honours after my name. Big deal. Although it stands for Bachelor of Science with Honours, a lot of bitter and twisted people, mainly those that don't have them, say it stands for Big Silly Cunt. The only drawback with the job at Jordan's was that I had to work 6 days a week. As I had to do 2 days at Carroll and Roth, I would otherwise only have been available at Jordan's 3 days a week. I therefore had to work Saturdays to justify my position within the company and to give Mike time off. Now I could see why he was so keen to give me the job. He saw the word mug stamped across my forehead. I had been due to pick up the golf on my first day, but Karen too broke the bad news to me. Mike had left the car in the car park overnight while it was serviced and someone had smashed it up. This was bad news, not just because I wasn't going to be able to pose for a while, but because I'd already sold my Escort and therefore I was without a car. I had to go to appointments on my push bike, which was very embarrassing and a constant source of amusement to Phil. Mike said the car was a write-off and he was going to buy me a new one. Great, I thought. A brand new VW Golf 16 valve with sunroof CD player. Wicked. Wrong. I got a brand new VW Polo with an engine the size of a matchbox. At least it had a phone in it, so that had a bit of pose value. After a while I grew to love that little car and wasn't in the least bit disappointed that I hadn't got the Golf. It was 100% reliable and never let me down. Working Saturdays was a bore. There was very rarely anything much to do. We had a Saturday girl, Ruth, who used to come in and write letters or make phone calls all day. I'm not complaining about that. I could have got her doing some really pointless work, but as long as she was there in case a punter came in, I didn't care. In the end, I spent most Saturdays writing letters and on the phone too. West Ham played in the Makita tournament at Highbury the weekend before the season started and got thumped 6-1 by Sampdoria. Arsenal beat Panathinaikos of Greece in their game, so we had to play the Greeks in the 3rd-4th place playoff on the Sunday. We drew 1-1 but lost on penalties. It was a sign of things to come. On the opening day we played the lovely Luton at Upton Park and drew 0-0. I resisted the temptation to take a radio into the office, knowing that it would bring about the same result we got against QPR a few seasons previously. I was very upset that we hadn't beaten Luton. After all, they were the team we'd beaten 5-0 a few short months before. We had not made many changes to the team. 2 new signings played that day, Mitchell Thomas from Spurs and Mike Small signed from Brighton. After the signings of Breaker and Dowie the year before, it seemed West Ham were assembling a team of former Luton players. My stomach couldn't take it. In midweek we drew 1-1 at Sheffield United, Mike Small putting us ahead, only for throwaway mode to come back into play. We'd gone longer than anticipated without defeat, but still only had 2 points when we played Wimbledon at Selhurst Park. They had moved out of Plough Lane because it had quite rightly been condemned. I was confident of a result, as we were unbeaten on Wimbledon's patch, but we still only had 2 points at the end of this game. We lost 2-0, despite John Fashanu being sent off. I'd phoned Close and Staintooth to see if they were going to the Villa match, but got pretty short shrift from both of them. They now viewed me as the part-timer, someone who couldn't be bothered to go on Saturdays, whereas they went to more or less every game. I wasn't going to rise to it. I went on my own. It was a funny feeling standing on the North Bank. was hardly alone. There were 23,644 people in the ground, but I felt as though I was alone. Someone tapped me on the shoulder and asked why Dowie wasn't playing. I told him he'd been sold to Southampton that day. We got chatting. You're never on your own very long at Upton Park. Villa looked strong, and I feared the worst, especially when Tony Daly put them 1-0 up in the second half. A rousing display saw us turn it around. Mike Small scored his first goal at Upton Park, and Leroy Rossignol the second, before Kenny Brown belted in a swirling shot towards the end. I couldn't wait to get back to the car and was relieved to find it still in one piece. I rang Jenny from the car and went home a happy man. Perhaps things weren't going to be so bad after all. Perhaps I'd been a little pessimistic. 1 defeat in 4 games wasn't too bad. Perhaps we would stay up.